first of all, the sponsor themselves are responsible. They need to understand that no matter where they get the data from, the FDA is going to hold them accountable to make sure that that data is real and applicable to their device.
Today, I've got Sandy and Mike from Wuxi on the podcast with me today, and we are going to talk about some recent developments with the FDA and trends in biocompatibility. So, Sandy and Mike, let's start with this recent announcement from the FDA about fraudulent labs. I am going to show those who are joining us via the video podcast, and I will have this link available for those of you who are listening to it that you can get to it later. But basically, FDA published this announcement, press release that says, fraudulent and unreliable laboratory testing data in pre-market submissions. FDA reminds medical device manufacturers to scrutinize third-party generated data. So I'll turn it over to you guys at that point. Tell us a little bit about what led to the FDA issuing that.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start here, Michelle. So there's a lot to unpack in that letter that the FDA wrote to industry. It really starts with the fact that they have advanced quite a bit in their own technical capabilities. And my understanding is they're starting to use AI technology to search back through their database to see if there's data that looks unusual, let's say. And what they found is quite interesting and alarming to a certain extent, that they found that there have been some labs that have, there's a couple of terms for it, dry labbed. They have basically taken data, copied it, put it into a report, and sent it off and collected money from a client for that data. And then the client innocently submits it to the FDA. And so the FDA's first warning the industry that this can happen. And then second, they're trying to give you some pathways to try and figure it out. What's the best way that you can look at a lab and or ultimately, and they will be very firm with this, look at the data and say, does it make sense?
Yep.
And so they
Let me just interject there, Mike. I actually had that experience. I have a client that I support periodically with firms that he's a U.S. agent for. And he came to me, and 4 different firms that he represents, totally unrelated, but all based in China, all 4 got letters from the FDA exactly because they all had similar data because they used the same lab and they didn't know it.
Yep.
And so this is like real people and these 510Ks were back from the late 90s. So they're getting in their Wayback Machine with their AI technology, and they're finding decades worth of this fraudulent lab data.
And they're doing it easily, right? The AI is doing it automatically. So it's not like they've got an army of people that are in the background looking this up. So it's real. It can happen. And what they're trying to get across to industry is, first of all, the sponsor themselves are responsible. They need to understand that no matter where they get the data from, the FDA is going to hold them accountable to make sure that that data is real and applicable to their device. And there's a couple of ways that they can go about doing it. I'm going to talk first about the ASCA piece, because that's the first thing that they tell you to look for. And ASCA is a program that they've been using now for a number of years. They're starting to branch out, and we'll come to Sandy's piece of it in a little bit on the CLAP side of the world, but they're starting to branch out into other areas where they think it's applicable. Traditionally,
tell people what ASCA stands for.
Oh, sure. Sorry. So it is a accredited, accredited
Accreditation Scheme for Conformity Assessment. I did Google it at the time in case I got it all messed up.
It's an accreditation scheme, and that's the way the FDA looks at it. They are traditionally, they have always shied away from even talking to laboratories like us. because they always held the sponsor accountable. So they wouldn't, even if we wanted to talk to them, they wouldn't talk to us about a specific submission unless the sponsor got us involved. And typically that would happen through, as regulatory meetings. But they don't even really they never really wanted to talk to us. They figured out that they need to talk to us. They need to make sure that the laboratories are giving sponsors the right data. And so they've now come up with this accreditation scheme. And it really starts, they've pretty much adopted the ISO notified body concept here, where there is a small number of notified bodies, if you will, to use that term, that are allowed to verify that the laboratory's quality systems meet the requirements, meet the basic requirements. Before anything else happens, they have to have good, solid quality systems. Then the laboratory is allowed to submit to the ASCA program to basically end up being accredited through this program. So it starts with the basic quality systems, and then it moves to they actually treat it very stepwise there are 7 currently biocompatibility tests that are in the overall accreditation. And that whole process is very locked down so that the FDA knows that if they receive testing from an ASCA accredited laboratory, that they don't even have to check the data. They know that the laboratory has followed appropriate processes.
Now, is this like, if you get, say, an ISO 13485 certification, that's kind of like an umbrella over not only your whole quality system, but all the products that you make as well. What are kind of the tiers of how ASCA is set up and how it differs from that kind of mindset that somebody, may think?
Well, that's a great question. So the way ASCA works is they're not tied to 13485 or 17025. What they're really focused on is the laboratory got good quality systems regardless of what structure they choose. 13485, as you know, is really geared around good manufacturing practices. A lot of labs actually use 17025, which is the laboratory version of that. And actually Sandy's chemistry lab is accredited to 17025. Our broader labs are generally done to both 17025 and 13485 because some of the testing is used for CGMP type approval processes, and some of it is just straight laboratory test method. So
it is test specific too. So if somebody thought, I'm going to pick this lab because they've got ASCA accreditation, where does that get them in the validity of their data submitted to?
And it's very narrow right now. So that's a great question, because right now there are only 7 total biocompatibility tests that are in the ASCA scheme right now, of which there's only 5 labs in the world that are in the program, of which WuXi has 2 of those labs. And there's only 1 lab in the world that's got all 7 right now. And so the FDA is still working very hard with all of us to continue to roll this program out. And the fundamental piece behind it, Michelle, is that the lab is accredited to run that one test, one of the 7, let's say. And when they do that, and that data is submitted, that the FDA, it is also submitted with a certification, and this is a key piece. When the FDA sees the ASCA certification, they know that it is done per processes that have basically been submitted and approved by the FDA and not deviated from. The FDA actually locks them down and does not allow us to change them without their approval. And so they know they don't even have to check that aspect of the submission. And so for them, it simplifies the process. It just eliminates one more thing that they don't have to go through the detail of that specific lab and or that specific test, and they can then focus on the other ones that aren't ASCA certified. And so they're trying to get to the point where they can have the full suite be ASCA certified. And that's where actually CLAP starts to come in with on the chemistry side.
Okay. Well, let's move into CLAP. So in conjunction with that, or kind of moving in parallel paths, it seemed, shortly after the FDA made that announcement about the fraudulent data and recommending ASC accredited labs, shortly thereafter that they introduced this CLAP program. Cindy, tell us a little bit about what does CLAP stand for? How is it kind of related, or is it to, the ASCA program and this fraudulent data?
Sure. I think, first of all, it's important to know that CLAP is in their regulatory science tools bucket. It's not associated with any regulatory methods or directly associated to the ASCA program. I think it's hard to tell how, on the outside, it's hard to tell what CLAP, how that will connect to the ASCA program, if it'll connect at all. But it does stand for Chemical List and Analytical Protocol. So it's two separate things, right? The chemical list is a list of chemicals that the FDA has published that using their methods, they were able to detect and are associated with chemicals that you might see in a medical device when you do an extractable leachables program. So the point of this list is that you should be able to see these chemicals in your analytical methods. If you're doing an extractable leachable study, you should be able to see these chemicals or most of these chemicals and other chemicals as part of your method. If you're not seeing those chemicals, then that might be a signal that you have a problem with your methods and they're not sensitive enough or not universal enough to be able to analytical protocol. And this is a GC protocol that the FDA has shared.
What's GC?
GC. Oh, sorry. Gas chromatography. As chemists, we like our acronyms. So we just read through them. So gas chromatography, the instrument that would be capable of detecting volatile and semi-volatile organic compounds. So it's a piece of the puzzle for an extractable leachables program, a pretty big piece. So the FDA has published this protocol, and I don't believe their intent is that everybody should just adapt this protocol, because a lot of laboratories already have existing analytical methods that through the years they've found to be suitable for their extractable leachable program. And now they have the chemical list that they can compare what they see against that chemical list to see how well it matches up. I think the analytical protocol, from my perspective, is a good tool for laboratories that want to do extractable leachables testing. It might give them a jump start to know where to start. If laboratories are finding that their methods don't line up with that chemical list, they can go back to the FDA method as a tool.
Does the CLAP program have anything
to maybe refine their methods a little bit further?
Okay. Does the CLAP program have anything to do with ASCA?
In my opinion, I think they're separate things. The CLAP came out of the Office of Science and Engineering Laboratory of the FDA, which is a separate group from the ones who review the data that comes in for submissions. Sometimes the scientists from OSEL group will consult with the reviewers on those programs, but they are separate groups. It's really, I don't know how much they collaborated on that list. If you go to the FDA website under the regulatory tools or regulatory science tools, where CLAP resides, you'll see that it says that the CLAP program or these regulatory science tools aren't meant to override the regulatory standards that exist. And they might not be, you've
I've
got
also
that.
got that one up here. So I will put this link into the podcast notes as well, so that you guys can read about what she's explaining about the regulatory science tools. So this is like a little bit more of a pre-market type of not pre-market, but it's early science.
Right.
It's outside of your submission. So we talked about how ASCA actually has some utility in making the review for FDA more efficient. Does CLAP does it have any benefit or utility in the 510(k) program?
I think that remains to be seen, how the reviewers will reference and use the CLAP list and the procedure, the analytical procedure, how they'll use that in comparison to the reviews. I think customers could probably expect maybe a range of experiences around that. I think they might not reference it at all. They might not use the tool as part of the review. They might decide that they want to use it very heavily and have you kind of do an equivalency review to the methods that were used in the study and the methods that are available on that as that research tool.
Mm-hmm.
I personally, when the CLAP was announced, when that announcement came out, we had a lot of customers asking us how that tool should be leveraged in their submissions. Are they expected to use that analytical protocol exactly? Will they be reviewed against that? And I think it's still a little bit early to understand how it will be used. My guess is it'll probably be not necessarily used consistently. I don't think the FDA has any clear direction about how the CLAP will be used in relationship to the submission review process. So it'll be interesting to see. But I think from my understanding, it's a tool. It's a tool that you can choose to use or choose not to use, but it's really kind of meant to give you some guidance about answering that question: are my methods sufficient enough or not?
Mm-hmm. And then what impact do you think that the CLAP will have on smaller labs or maybe non-ASC labs?
I suspect that perhaps the FDA will ask laboratories if they have questions about the suitability of the methods for extractable leachables testing. They might ask the testing to show equivalency to this, to demonstrate that they're capable of detecting those and identifying those compounds that are on the CLAP list, or explaining how they're not relevant to the medical device that was being tested. So I think that the FDA might use their own tool to be able to evaluate the effectiveness of the chemical characterization that was conducted.
Mm-hmm. Well, with all of this said, all of these new programs and requirements, like how does one go about choosing a quality lab, in a way that it's not just a paperwork exercise because they don't understand biocompatibility?
I'll say, unless you want to go, Mike.
No, go right ahead, Sandy. I'll come in after you.
So I think that the biocompatibility testing, including chemical characterization and risk assessment, it's a huge investment, right? And if you translated that to your personal life, how much due diligence would you do if you were going to invest in buying a brand new car or invest in buying a house? And if and translate that into choosing your chemistry laboratory.
And just to your point with your analogy, biocompatibility testing costs as much as a nice car or a house, entry-level house.
Exactly.
So this is really
exactly
important.
Yes, exactly my point. And then if you factor in, if you bought a car, for instance, and you bought a car, you bought it off Amazon or you bought it off Facebook Marketplace, you trusted the seller and you wired them the money, and then went to pick up your car and realized there was no car at all, or it wasn't quite as advertised, right? You've just wasted a lot of money. And now you were going to use that car to go to work, and now you can't go to work. So now it's costing you even more money. Biocompatibility testing is the same way. You're going to spend a lot of money. And if you spend that money and you haven't talked to a real person, you haven't vetted how you feel about their expertise, you haven't understood how they're going to support you when you go to submit that data, and inevitably you're going to get questions because the FDA always has questions. You want that same sort of support, because if you're going to do all that work, spend all that money, and find out it wasn't sufficient enough, or the laboratory isn't there to support you after the sale when you get the questions from the regulatory bodies, it's going to cost you a whole lot of time to go back, redo that testing. It's time that you've missed in the marketplace. So it's a huge deal. So people should be thinking about doing their due diligence, talking to the people, understanding the customer service behind it, maybe going to visit the lab to see how many staff members they have, to see what kind of analytical equipment or animal facilities they have. See if they have ISO 17025 accreditation or ASCA accreditation. I think all of those things are really good signs that you're working with a credible lab. If they're willing to support you, not only before they collect the money, but after they collect the money, and how they go about that. It is trust your gut. Those are good signs. But if you go on the internet, you find a lab, it's easy to put up a website, right? Mm-hmm. And this is maybe in the 90s, maybe this wasn't so much a factor, but it's really easy to put up a front that you have a legitimate laboratory. Go on site, get the facts.
Well, and speaking of, we started this conversation with, there's a problem with fraudulent data. So you don't think that they might put a fraudulent certificate on their site? And then one thing I wanted people to know is that there is a list on the FDA website, I'll put a link to that too, about the ASC accredited labs and which labs are accredited for which tests. So that was a big thing that stood out to me, is that you need both pieces to get the utility that you are anticipating by just going to an ASC lab.
And I'll build on Sandy's theme of how expensive this all is, but I'll point to the time factor. Michelle, as you know, when clients come to you at the end of the process, they've got a product that's ready to go to market. Time is probably more valuable to them than even the cost of the testing that we're doing. They need to get to the market in order for them to start being able to sell their product. And time is the biggest factor here. And so I would go back to your point, do your homework up front. Follow the FDA's advice. The first thing they're telling you to do is go find an ASCA accredited lab, because that's going to give you the bare minimum of both quality systems, and that at least some level of the testing is going to be performed in a manner that the FDA is going to find acceptable. And that lab more than likely is going to be able to do all the rest of the work for you and do it well, and in a manner that's going to be accepted by the FDA, and ultimately in the long haul save you time to market. That's the critical factor here.
Yep. And if I can just second that, I had a different client that came to me. They had already had their extractables and leachables underway with another unnamed lab. We'll just leave it at that. The lab had made and recommended some choices that the FDA did not agree with. So they came to me mid-review to try to negotiate things between the FDA and the lab. It was clear that the lab was in the wrong, and they offered to redo the testing for free for this company, and they chose to stay with that lab that the FDA already had problems with the methods and the conclusions. And I mean, how long does extractables and leachables take? It's not a quick test.
Yeah, it's months.
Yeah. So they lost all that time, and then they resubmitted, and we eventually got through the FDA, but the FDA had problems with that testing that was redone. So then now they had to withdraw one submission. So they've lost all that time and money with the FDA. They've lost the additional time with extractables and leachables. They've gone through yet another review and review fee with the FDA. That one was delayed because we still had to negotiate these issues with this this lab that didn't have these quality standards we've been talking about.
And unfortunately, those are true stories. That's the sad reality. And to Sandy's point, anybody can put up a website these days. We used to call it hang a shingle. Now it's put up a website, and to your point, have certificates on there that may or may not be real. And so doing your due diligence on the quality systems that they're subscribing to, the notified bodies that they're using, going to the lab and seeing what equipment they have, what personnel they have, being able to talk to knowledgeable people in the industry, such as yourself, Michelle, that can guide them towards, let's say, a better experience. It's not only more efficient, but it'll save you time in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, do you guys have anything else that you want to volunteer or add to our conversation here? Or boy, you wish that the startups that come to Wuxi knew or did this in advance?
I would offer the single thing is don't be penny wise and pound foolish. If your life, basically your business life, depends on getting this product to market, don't cut corners at the end. That would be my single biggest advice. Go to somebody like yourself. There's a lot of reputable organizations in the industry that can help get through this. And the FDA, they said ASCA first. They said know your data second. Mm-hmm. And both of those are a requirement for them. And knowing your data is the part that really got these other labs that you submitted for, Michelle, or they submitted inadvertently from the labs in China. They just submitted the data without understanding what it really said, not recognizing that data represents their product. And if it isn't accurate, it's their responsibility and it's their delay. And that's don't cut corners at the end would be my advice.
Okay. Sandy, anything to add there?
Yeah, thank you. I would add, leverage the pre-submission process, right? We have a lot of, we have customers who, when we recommend the pre-sub process, say, I don't want to get in trouble with the FDA. So I'd rather just do the testing and give them the results. But the truth of the matter is, you can still get in a lot of trouble with the FDA, even more trouble with the FDA, if you go into it blindly. So it's really helpful to have that collaborative approach for you and the FDA to be on the same page when it comes to your biocompatibility testing plan. And we've seen that save customers a lot of time and a lot of anguish. And it helps the laboratories to make sure that they're aligned with that testing plan as well. You know, and I think be a partner with your testing laboratory. Be collaborative. Share all of the information that you have on your device, so that they can do the best testing possible, especially with chemical characterization. If we know the materials and the processing aids that go into it, we can give you a much better end product with much better identifications, which will go a long way for the risk assessment and ultimately your submission approval timeline.
Okay. Well, thank you guys for your time. We've really packed a lot of in-depth and complicated topics in here, but I hope you guys kind of got an overview of where the FDA is moving for biocompatibility. And you know, give me a call, give Whooshie a call if you have any specific questions, and for sure for your help selecting your testing methodologies and parameters. So.
All right. Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you.